We start in the commercial realm with the McDonnell Douglas MD-11. Introduced in the early 1990s, this trijet was supposed to be the modernized, highly efficient successor to the DC-10. To maximize fuel efficiency and increase range, engineers did something drastic. They shrunk the horizontal stabilizer, the small wings on the tail, by roughly 30%. This drastically reduced aerodynamic drag, but it created a massive problem for the pilots: a shifted center of gravity. The MD-11 was inherently unstable. To keep it flying straight, McDonnell Douglas had to install a complex computer system just to artificially stabilize the pitch. While it was a phenomenal cargo hauler, pilots absolutely hated landing it. Its approach speed was blisteringly fast, around 160 knots. It was notorious for bouncing on the runway. If a pilot overcorrected or flared just a second too late, the aircraft had a terrifying tendency to flip onto its back or break its wing spar. It demanded absolute perfection, and for many crews, the mental workload on a windy approach was a nightmare. Moving to the Cold War, we have an aircraft that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie, the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. Designed by the legendary Kelly Johnson, this was a Mach 2 interceptor essentially built around a massive General Electric J79 turbojet engine, producing almost 15,000 pounds of thrust. The wings were so thin and sharp that ground crews actually had to put protective covers over the edges so they wouldn't cut themselves. As a high-altitude interceptor, it dominated. But pilots quickly discovered a fatal flaw: it had the glide ratio of a bank vault. If you lost engine power, you were falling out of the sky. The real tragedy happened when countries like West Germany tried to use this high-altitude speed demon as a low-level fighter-bomber. Flying a twitchy, unforgiving rocket ship at low altitudes through European weather was a recipe for disaster. Over 100 German pilots lost their lives, earning the F-104 grim nicknames like the Flying Coffin and the Widowmaker. Finally, we enter the world of corporate aviation with the Mitsubishi MU-2. Introduced in the late 1960s, this twin turboprop was designed to go fast and land on short runways. To achieve fighter-like speeds in a civilian plane, engineers gave it tiny swept wings, but because the wings were so small, there was no room for traditional ailerons. Instead, the MU-2 used spoilers to roll. Under normal conditions, it was a hot rod, but in an emergency, it was a pilot's worst nightmare. If you lost an engine on takeoff, the complex spoiler system in high wing loading meant you had a fraction of a second to react. If you used standard recovery techniques taught in flight school, the MU-2 would snap roll into the ground. It was so demanding that the FAA eventually stepped in, mandating hyper-specific mandatory training just to keep pilots alive. Stepping back into the commercial realm, we have an aircraft that didn't just fight its pilots, it terrified the flying public: the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. In the early 1970s, McDonnell Douglas was in a desperate, high-stakes race against Lockheed to dominate the new wide-body market. To get the DC-10 to airlines first, they made fatal compromises. Powered by 3 colossal General Electric CF6 turbofan engines, including one uniquely mounted straight through the vertical tail, this trijet was an absolute powerhouse, capable of hauling up to 380 passengers. But its engineering held a ticking time bomb. The outward-opening bulk cargo doors relied on a dangerously flawed latching mechanism. At high altitudes, the immense cabin pressure could force an improperly latched door to blow violently open. When this happened, the cabin floor would collapse, severing the critical hydraulic lines routed right beneath it. Pilots were suddenly left wrestling a massive, crippled, wide-body jet with zero flight controls. After a series of catastrophic explosive decompressions and a later incident where an engine physically ripped off the wing during takeoff in Chicago, the FAA did the unthinkable and temporarily grounded the entire fleet. The press mercilessly dubbed it the Death Cruiser, cementing its legacy as an aircraft haunted by its own rushed engineering. Rewind to the height of World War II, and we find a very different kind of nightmare. The Hughes H-4 Hercules, famously mocked by the press as the Spruce Goose. With Allied supply ships being decimated by German U-boats, the U.S. military desperately needed a flying transport ship to safely move troops and heavy tanks across the Atlantic. But because steel and aluminum were strictly rationed for the war effort, billionaire aviator Howard Hughes had to build this titan almost entirely out of wood. The numbers on this machine are staggering. It boasted a mind-bending wingspan of 320 feet, a record that remained completely unbeaten for over 70 years. To get this 400,000-pound wooden behemoth off the water, engineers strapped on 8 massive Pratt & Whitney WASP major radial engines, pumping out a combined 24,000 horsepower. But Hughes's relentless perfectionism and the sheer impractical scale of the aircraft became its downfall. By the time the massive flying boat was actually finished, the war was already over. The military didn't need it, and the U.S. Senate dragged Hughes into furious hearings, accusing him of wasting millions in taxpayer money on a plane that couldn't even fly. Desperate for vindication, Hughes took the controls on November 2, 1947, throttled up all 8 engines, and flew it for exactly 1 mile over Long Beach Harbor. It was the first and only time the Spruce Goose ever flew, making it the most expensive, gigantic paperweight in aviation history. The MD-11, the F-104, and the MU-2 didn't just push the boundaries of physics, they tested the absolute limits of human skill. Today, the Starfighter is retired, the MU-2 flies under strict regulations, and the MD-11 is mostly flown by highly experienced freight operators. But their legacy is vital. These notoriously difficult planes taught the aviation industry a bloody but necessary lesson. Speed and efficiency mean nothing if the human in the seat can't safely fly the machine. They pioneered the push for better ergonomics and modern fly-by-wire safety systems. These aircraft completely redefined the commercial and military landscape by showing us exactly what not to do. What are your thoughts on these notorious planes? Would you want to fly them? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more aviation deep dives, make sure to subscribe to Flight King and watch out for future videos right here. Thanks for watching.